Hey everyone, it's Mrs. Bear here. So today I want to talk to you about memorization, and I want to provide you with some really solid tips for how to memorize your lines, whether it is a monologue, a duet, a full scene, a whole play, whatever it may be. There are some memorization techniques that can help. So the first thing I want to show you is the monologue that I'm going to be working with. I'm not going to do this whole thing, but I'll do a piece of it. So it's called Audition by Matthew Calhoun. All right. And it's a comedic monologue, just so you know. So the first tip I have for you is all about repetition. This is a tried and true tip that works for everything. It's all about repeating lines until you have it memorized, then moving on and adding to it. Okay, so it's a step-by-step process. So this is how it works. Step 1, read the first line. My resume. Step 2, say that line over and over and over again until you think you have it memorized. My resume, my resume, my resume, my resume. Step 3, when you think you have it memorized, look away from the paper and say the line. My resume. If you have it memorized, you move on to the next step. That step is to repeat this process with the next line, like so. Oh, first I should mention that I could play any of the parts in this play. Oh, first I should mention that I could play any of the parts in this play. Oh, first I should mention that I could play any of the parts in this play. Oh, first I should mention that I could play any of the parts in this play. So now I have that line memorized and the first line memorized. So now I'm going to combine the two lines together and see if I still remember them. My resume. Oh, first I should mention that I could play any of the parts in this play. Great. I have both lines memorized. I'm going to keep repeating this process until the entire monologue is memorized. So that means line 3, I would do the same thing. Read it. Any. I could play an ant. And I'd say that over and over again. Any. I could play an ant. 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 See, I just looked up away from the page. Now I'm pretty sure I have it. So, but do I have all 3 lines? That is the question. Okay, my resume. Oh, first I should mention that I could play any of the parts in this play. And I just forgot. So what happens if you just forgot? Well, you go back to the part where you forgot and you repeat that line. Any, I could play an ant. 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 And then you try it again. You do not move on until you can say all of the lines together. And then you just keep repeating this process until the whole monologue is memorized. This actually is the technique that works for me and that I use, although I like to move with it. So I'll actually get up and move around while I'm doing it. So rather than just sitting, I'm also moving as I'm thinking of the line. So I'd be like, my resume. Oh, I should mention that I could play any of the parts in this play. Any. An ant. See? And now all of a sudden I'm remembering the lines. So that works for me. That's tried and true method number 1. Now, let's talk about the next method. Some students like to write things down, and this is a method that does not work for me, but works for other people. And the way it works is get yourself a piece of paper, obviously, right? Get yourself a piece of paper, take your little sheet, and you're going to write down each line. And you're just going to keep doing that until you have all the lines memorized. And you'll keep doing that over and over and over and over again. So, tip number 2, write it down. Write until you know it and can translate it into the action. Okay? That's tip number 2. Tip number 3 is one that works really well if you're in an actual play. But you have to be in an actual play, and you have to know the blocking of the scene and who your character is. What are the objectives? So that's the goal. What are your obstacles? The tactics that you are using, the expectations, all of that, all the goat. So you're going to act it out with the blocking, and you just practice that over and over again until it is good to go. So maybe I'll start while I'm sitting down. My resume. Oh, I should mention that I could play any of the parts in this play. Any. I could play an ant. I could play blah, blah, blah. I could play blah, 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 blah. And that's how this monologue keeps going on. So now you're actually walking through whatever your blocking is. So if you are saying that the character moves from the chair, stands up, and crosses down left, then you're going to walk through that. Maybe they stand up and they cross over to a table, they pick up a glass, take a drink of water, and say their line. So this is all about that movement piece and who your character is in the performance. This one works really, really well. And so this one goes really well with number 1, the repeat and add on as you go. Okay? So that was tip number 3. Now, the last tip that I'm going to talk about is one that I personally have never used, but I know a lot of people who do use this, and that is to record your lines and practice them that way. You record the line into some kind of audio device, and then you listen to it back. And you keep doing that over and over again until you are comfortable saying the lines 100% on your own. Now, this works really well if you are actually in a scene with someone else, where you could actually record their lines in the recording device and then speak back and forth with that other character. So that's another option, is to record it. It works really well for some people. So those are my 4 major tips. So let's review. The first one was all about repeat and connect. Repeat one line until it's memorized. Repeat the next line, then connect the 2. The second tip was all about writing it down over and over and over and over again until you know it pat. The third tip was about acting out the actual scene with your blocking and your character in place. And the fourth tip was to record it. So those are my 4 tips. Now, it's great to have tips, but there are some massive don'ts when it comes to memorization. For example, don't listen to music while you try to memorize your lines. Don't watch TV while you try to memorize your lines. Basically, don't put yourself into a situation where you have distractions and try to memorize your lines, because that will make it more difficult for you to do. Now, there's something else. Don't memorize using an accent, because then you will memorize that accent, and if the director says, "Ugh, that accent does not work, we need to come up with a different idea," you will struggle to then change the accent. So memorize in your regular voice, even if you are practicing it like your character for tip number 3, where you act it out in blocking and character. Okay, so don't use the accent though. Trust me on this. All right, so those are the big don'ts. You don't want distractions while you are trying to memorize. Now that's it for today. I hope these tips are helpful. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to try each tip and see which one works for you. And if you don't like any of them, then find something else. I am not the be-all, end-all of theater knowledge. And what works for me and works for other people might not work for you. So it's all about finding what does work. Anyways, that's it for today. I'll see you in class, and I hope this was helpful. Bye.